They said the old cabin outside Boulder had been empty for years, just a broken place swallowed by summer weeds and mountain silence. Then Ethan Miller came back, a former Navy SEAL with tired eyes, locked memories, and no wish to be needed by anyone again. For a few weeks, the forest left him alone, until one stormy evening, something knocked at his door. Not a person. A pregnant deer stood on the porch, trembling, tangled in barbed wire, blood dripping onto the boards. Ethan reached for his rifle by instinct. Then she lifted her head and looked at him, not wild, not afraid, but begging. When she collapsed across the threshold, he saw movement inside her swollen belly. She had not come to save herself. She had come because her babies were dying, and the man who once failed to save a life had one chance to try again. Summer lay heavy over the foothills outside Boulder, Colorado, where red dirt roads, pine shadows, and thunderclouds gathered beneath the jagged blue shoulders of the Rocky Mountains. Ethan Miller had chosen the old cabin because it asked nothing of him. It stood at the edge of town where the last mailboxes leaned toward the road, and the first trees began their slow claim on human things. The porch sagged a little on the left side. The screen door complained in a rusty whine. Summer weeds pressed against the steps like green fingers testing an old wound. To most people, it would have looked lonely. To Ethan, loneliness had felt honest. He was 39 years old, a former Navy SEAL, broad through the shoulders but slightly bent from years of carrying more than gear. His face was square and weathered, with dark blonde hair cut short, a rough beard he trimmed only when it bothered him, and blue-gray eyes that seemed built for scanning doorways, tree lines, and shadows long after the war had ended. Around strangers, he was polite but distant. Around neighbors, he gave short answers and fixed broken fences without being asked, then disappeared before anyone could thank him. He had once been the kind of man other men followed into darkness. Now he flinched at fireworks and woke before dawn with his hands clenched, listening for a radio call that would never come again. In his last mission, a young teammate had bled out before extraction arrived. Ethan had done everything right, according to reports. That was the cruelest part. Paper had forgiven him, memory had not. So he lived alone outside Boulder, where the afternoons smelled of hot dust and pine resin, and the cicadas screamed from the brush as if tiny, ridiculous prophets were warning the world to repent. That evening, a summer storm had rolled down from the mountains with theatrical anger. It snapped branches, slapped rain against the windows, and hammered the tin roof until the cabin sounded like an old drum in the hands of a furious god. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a black coffee gone cold and a rifle cleaned too many times laid beside a folded newspaper. He had not turned on the lights. He preferred the gray-blue hush after storms, the moment when the world seemed embarrassed by its own violence. Water dripped from the porch roof in steady beats. Somewhere in the trees, a jay complained like an old man denied dessert. Ethan almost smiled at that. Then came the knock. It was soft, uneven, barely louder than a branch tapping wood. He lifted his head and listened. The cabin held its breath with him. Another sound came, slower this time. Thump, pause, scrape. His right hand moved before thought could catch it, closing around the rifle. The motion was old, clean, trained into bone. In the years since he left the teams, Ethan had learned that the body kept its own religion, and fear was one of its stubborn gods. He rose quietly, crossed the room, and stopped beside the door. Through the torn corner of the curtain, he saw only the porch washed in storm water, the yard shining dark, the trees bending under the last breath of wind. A third knock came, weaker than the first two. This time he heard something behind it, a breath, heavy and wet, not human. Ethan opened the door. At first, his mind refused the shape before him. A mule deer doe stood on the porch, close enough that he could see the rain trembling on her lashes. She was perhaps 4 or 5 years old, full-grown but terribly thin beneath her summer coat of gray-brown and faded tan. Her belly was swollen, rounded low and heavy with late pregnancy. Mud streaked her legs. Her ears twitched with exhaustion rather than alertness. Around her neck and across the curve of her belly, strands of barbed wire and torn plastic mesh had twisted into a cruel harness, cutting through fur and into flesh. Blood ran in thin, dark lines down one side and dropped onto the boards between them. One hind leg shook badly, the hoof touching the porch as if the ground itself had become painful. Ethan froze. Deer did not come to doors. Deer did not stand before men with rifles and wait. They fled, vanished, became brown ghosts between trees. but this doe stayed. She raised her head with a slowness that seemed to cost her everything, and her black eyes met his. There was no gentleness in the wild, not the kind people painted on nursery walls. Ethan knew that. Trust was too easy a word. It was need. Raw, unwilling, desperate need. She looked at him like a queen stripped of her crown. Like some old creature from a myth who had crossed a burning kingdom to ask one disgraced soldier whether he still remembered how to be brave. "Easy," Ethan whispered, though his voice came out rough. "Easy, girl." The doe shifted forward. The barbed wire pulled tighter. Her body jerked, and a sound escaped her, low and broken. Ethan saw the swollen belly ripple, a sudden movement beneath the skin. His stomach turned cold despite the humid summer air. Pregnant, hurt, in trouble. The words lined up with military clarity, but beneath them, something older and uglier opened inside him. He remembered blood under a red light, a hand gripping his sleeve. The young man's mouth trying to form a joke because soldiers sometimes tried to make death feel embarrassed. Ethan had told him help was coming. Help had come too late. The porch blurred for half a second. He blinked hard. The doe took one more step toward him, not away, not sideways, but toward the open door and the only patch of dry light in the whole drowning evening. Her front legs buckled. Ethan dropped the rifle and lunged forward, but she was too heavy and too far gone. Grace, though he did not yet know he would give her that name, collapsed across the threshold with a hard, hollow thud that shook the porch boards. Her body landed half outside in the rain and half inside the cabin, as if the world had split her between wilderness and mercy. Ethan knelt beside her, his hands hovering, afraid to touch and more afraid not to. Blood mixed with rainwater and ran over the wood toward his boots. Beneath her swollen belly, something moved again, small and frantic. The doe's eyes rolled toward him, dark and pleading. Ethan's breath caught. The storm had passed, but another had entered his house. And this time, if a life slipped away in front of him, there would be no report, no command, no distant war to blame. There would only be his hands, the wounded animal at his door, and the terrible chance to become the man he had failed to be before. Ethan Miller called the Boulder County Wildlife Emergency number with one hand, while the other hovered over Grace's trembling shoulder, not touching her yet, as if the air between his palm and her body were holy ground. The storm had moved east, but its damage remained behind like a bad temper. Branches down across roads, muddy water rushing through ditches, gravel washed loose from the mountain lanes. The phone rang twice before a woman answered, calm and clipped, and Ethan forced himself to speak like the man he used to be when chaos needed orders. Pregnant mule deer, severe entanglement, barbed wire around neck and abdomen, hind leg bleeding, collapsed at my door. Address is off Sunshine Canyon. There was a pause, not careless, but measuring. Then another voice came on the line, steadier than the first, low and practical. This is Emily Carter, wildlife officer. Emily Carter was 34, though her voice carried the tired authority of someone older, a woman shaped by bad weather, frightened hikers, injured animals, and men who thought shouting made them useful. She was tall and lean, with wind-chapped fair skin, gray-green eyes, and auburn hair usually tied back beneath a faded field cap. People in town called her gentle, but that was only because they mistook restraint for softness. Emily had the kind of courage that did not announce itself. It simply showed up, muddy boots first, when others stepped away. Years earlier, she had watched a fawn die after tourists tried to rescue it from its mother, and since then, she carried a quiet anger toward human good intentions that arrived without knowledge. Ethan could almost hear that caution in her breathing. "Do not try to pull the animal inside," she said. "Do not get behind her. Do not put your face near her legs. A panicked doe can break your ribs faster than she knows she has done it." "She's half in the doorway already," Ethan said. Grace's flank shuddered. A thin sound came from her throat, neither cry nor breath, something caught between worlds. "She's in labor?" Emily asked. "I don't know." Her belly moved. Another pause. Outside, thunder muttered far away, like an old giant losing an argument over the next ridge. "I'm coming," Emily said, "but Boulder Canyon is blocked by a slide, and 2 rescue trucks are stuck behind floodwater. It may take time." Ethan looked at Grace's wire-cut skin, the blood darkening the porch boards, the swollen belly rising and falling too fast. Time. He hated that word. In combat, time was the enemy wearing a polite mask. Tell me what to do until you get here. Emily exhaled once, and in that small sound, Ethan heard her decide whether to trust him. Keep her cool but not chilled. Shade, water near her mouth, no forcing. Cut only the loose wire if you can do it without pulling against the wounds. Slow movements, low voice. If she kicks, you back away. Understand? Yes. And Mr. Miller? Yeah? Being brave is useful. Being stupid is just paperwork. Despite everything, Ethan gave a short, dry laugh. Copy that. He set the phone on speaker and moved like every floorboard was a sleeping snake. From the storage closet, he dragged out a heavy blue tarp, the kind he had bought for roof leaks and never used. He unfolded it over the porch roofline and tied one corner to a beam, making a patch of shade against the returning heat. Summer came back quickly after mountain rain. Already steam rose from the boards, and the air smelled of wet pine, mud, and blood. He filled a shallow metal bowl with water and slid it near Grace's muzzle. Her nostrils fluttered. For a moment she did nothing. Then, with painful slowness, her tongue touched the surface once, twice, as if remembering that the world still offered small mercies. Good girl, Ethan whispered. The words surprised him. He had spoken to men under fire, to commanders through static, to himself in nightmares. But this tenderness felt foreign, almost embarrassing. If anyone had been watching, he might have made a joke to bury it. No one was watching except Grace, and she was too busy surviving to judge him. He took the multi-tool from his belt and opened the wire cutters. The first strand of barbed wire lay across her shoulder, not deep, but twisted into the plastic mesh. Ethan crouched at her side, careful to stay away from the hind legs. His knees cracked. His left hand shook. He hated that too. Once, he had been able to disassemble a rifle blindfolded in the dark belly of a helicopter. Now, a wounded deer made his fingers clumsy. The wire clicked under the cutters. Grace flinched hard, muscles bunching. Ethan froze. Easy, Emily's voice came from the phone. Stop when she moves. Let her settle. Ethan waited. Grace's breath came fast, hot and wet. Her black eye rolled toward him, wide with pain but not accusation. He thought of another eye, human and terrified, under red emergency light. Petty Officer Caleb Ross had been 26, sharp-jawed, freckled, always grinning like death owed him money. He had called Ethan old man, even though Ethan was only 35 then. On the last mission, Caleb's voice had filled the radio, thin with blood loss but still trying to joke. Chief, if I don't make it, tell my sister I stole her truck, not her boyfriend. Ethan had promised him extraction was close. He had lied because hope sometimes demanded a liar's uniform. The helicopter came 9 minutes late. 9 minutes had become a kingdom Ethan could never leave. The wire snapped. Ethan jerked back, chest tight. The sound had been too much like a radio crackle. He swallowed, tasted metal, and forced himself into the present. Porch, deer, summer, water bowl, Emily's voice, blood on wood. Not there, here, not Caleb, Grace. He cut another section, then another. Each time the wire loosened, Grace trembled as if the pain had teeth. Once her hind leg kicked weakly, striking the porch with a hollow thud, and Ethan backed away as instructed. Good, Emily said. You listened. That puts you ahead of half the people I meet. Only half? On generous days. The faint humor steadied him more than comfort would have. He worked for 20 minutes, maybe 30. Time stretched and folded. Sweat ran down his spine. Mosquitoes found his wrists. Grace drank again, then lowered her head with a sigh so weary it seemed older than the mountains. The worst wire around her belly remained, embedded too deeply for Ethan to risk cutting without tools or a veterinarian. But the loose strands were gone. The plastic mesh no longer pulled at her neck. Her breathing, while still ragged, slowed by a fraction. Ethan sat back on his heels, hands streaked with rust and blood, and looked at her. She had not kicked him. She had not fought him. This wild creature, crowned with no antlers and armed with nothing but terror, had endured his hands because somewhere inside her pain she had chosen not to run. Or perhaps she had simply run as far as she could. Ethan touched the porch beside her, not her body, just the blood-wet wood near her shoulder. I'm still here, he said quietly. He was not sure whether he was speaking to Grace, to the unborn fawns moving beneath her skin, or to a dead young man whose voice still lived in static. the answer did not matter. For the first time in years, Ethan did not feel like a man waiting for punishment. He felt like a man being given orders by something larger than command, larger even than guilt. Grace's ear flicked toward him, her belly tightened again, and she groaned. Ethan reached for the phone. "Emily," he said, his voice low but no longer frozen, "you need to hurry." Then he looked down at the doe lying across his threshold, half in wilderness and half in shelter, and understood the brutal mercy of the moment. This time, hesitation was not allowed to wear the mask of caution. This time, if life was going to stay, Ethan would have to meet it at the door. By the time Emily Carter's truck finally growled up the muddy road, the sun had fallen behind the foothills, leaving Boulder's summer sky bruised purple and gold, as if the mountains themselves had been struck and were too proud to complain. Ethan stood on the porch with blood on his hands, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt, and Grace lying across the threshold like a fallen creature from some old wilderness legend. The doe's sides rose and fell too fast. The blue tarp above her snapped softly in the damp wind. Rain had begun again, not the angry hammering storm from earlier, but a thin, needling drizzle that made the porch boards shine. Emily stepped out of the truck before the engine fully died. In person, she looked even more weather-shaped than her voice had sounded. Tall, lean, and practical, with fair skin reddened by wind and sun, gray-green eyes that missed almost nothing, and auburn hair tucked under a faded green field cap. Her uniform was dusty at the knees, her boots were caked in red mud, and her face carried the alert patience of someone who had seen both animals and people make terrible decisions when pain entered the room. She gave Ethan one quick glance, not judging the blood, the rifle on the floor inside, or the fear he was trying to hide behind a soldier's stillness. Then she knelt several feet from Grace, careful, angled away from the hind legs. "You did right cutting only the loose wire," she said. Praise from Emily sounded like a field report accidentally allowed to become kind. Ethan gave a tight nod. "She's getting worse." Grace's belly tightened under the remaining barbed wire. Her neck stretched, her mouth opened, and a low groan moved through her body. Emily's expression changed, just slightly, but Ethan saw it. The line between her brows deepened. "She's not just injured," Emily said. "She's delivering." The words landed on the porch like thunder without sound. Ethan looked down at Grace's swollen belly, where something shifted beneath the wet fur, a hidden life pushing against the border of the world. For a moment he was back in the red-lit belly of a helicopter that never came, counting breaths that were not his own. Emily pulled a radio from her belt, then cursed softly when static answered. "Signal's weak down here." She took Ethan's phone and dialed a number from memory. "Sarah, I need you on speaker. Pregnant mule deer, severe entanglement, premature labor, civilian assist." The woman who answered had a voice like gravel warmed by sunlight. "Tell the civilian not to be heroic." "Too late," Emily said. "He's already bloody." "Then tell him not to become a second patient." Dr. Sarah Johnson was 45, a wildlife veterinarian known across Boulder County for arriving at disasters with a medical kit in one hand and merciless common sense in the other. Ethan had heard her name from ranchers in town. They spoke of her with the same mixture of respect and nervousness men usually reserved for judges and thunderstorms. She was medium height, compact and strong, with brown skin freckled by years outdoors, dark hair threaded with silver, and tied back so tightly it seemed even her hair obeyed instructions. Her eyes, people said, were sharp enough to find a heartbeat in a snowbank, but her hands turned gentle the moment they touched a wounded animal. Years before, she had lost her younger brother in a summer climbing accident when help arrived late. And since then she carried no patience for delay, drama, or men who confused panic with love. Through the phone, she asked clipped questions. Breathing rate, bleeding, wire position, contractions. Ethan answered what he could, and Emily filled in the rest, her gaze never leaving Grace. "All right," Sarah said. "Do not remove the embedded belly wire now. If the fawn is coming, you focus on birth first. Clean towels, warm water. Keep the doe shaded and calm. If the fawn doesn't breathe, stimulate with firm rubbing, not gentle petting. Firm, like its mother would lick it." Ethan swallowed. "I've never delivered anything except bad news." "Then congratulations," Sarah said dryly. "Today you diversify." Emily's mouth twitched. A tiny smile smuggled into the emergency. The humor did not lighten the scene so much as keep it from breaking apart. Ethan ran inside and returned with towels, a basin of warm water, and an old cotton blanket. His hands moved quickly now, not without fear, but through it. Grace groaned again. Her back legs trembled. Emily shifted closer, still cautious, speaking in a low voice that seemed meant for both deer and man. "Easy, girl. You made it this far." The porch became a strange chapel. Rain whispered beyond the tarp. The cicadas had gone silent, as if even the small, noisy prophets in the trees understood that a birth was underway. Grace strained, and something slick and dark appeared beneath her tail. Ethan's breath stopped. "Sarah," Emily said into the phone, "we have presentation. Let the doe push. Assist only if progress stops." Grace pushed once, then again, her whole body shaking with the effort. The fawn emerged slowly, impossibly delicate from such a brutal hour. First the tiny head, then folded legs, then a narrow, wet body sliding onto the blanket Emily had pulled beneath her. It was smaller than Ethan expected. All ribs and angles and long limbs folded like unfinished prayers. Its coat was soaked dark, its white spots barely visible, its legs too thin, too beautiful, too absurd for a world that had barbed wire in it. "Come on," Emily whispered. The fawn did not move. Ethan waited for the chest to rise. It didn't. The silence after birth was worse than any gunfire he remembered. Sarah's voice cut through the phone. "Clear the nose. Rub hard. Now." Ethan grabbed a clean towel, wiped the tiny muzzle, and began rubbing along the fawn's ribs and back. At first he was too careful. "Harder," Sarah ordered. "You're not polishing silver." Ethan almost laughed, but it came out like a broken breath. He rubbed harder, mimicking the rough insistence of a mother's tongue. Grace lifted her head an inch, then dropped it again, exhausted beyond instinct. Ethan worked faster. "Come on, little one," he muttered. "Don't you dare make your first mission a retreat." Emily leaned close, listening, again. Ethan rubbed, turned the fawn slightly, cleared its mouth, rubbed again. Seconds stretched like old guilt. He felt Caleb's ghost standing somewhere behind him, silent now, no radio static, no joke, only watching. Then the fawn's chest hitched. Once, Ethan froze. "Keep going," Sarah snapped. He did. The tiny mouth opened, and a thin, trembling cry spilled into the summer evening. It was weak, offended, and gloriously alive. Emily closed her eyes for half a second. Grace's ear flicked toward the sound. Ethan sat back on his heels, towel clutched in both hands, and a laugh escaped him rough, stunned, almost foolish. It sounded like a man discovering, after years inside iron armor, that his heart had not died after all. It had only been waiting for something small enough, helpless enough, and brave enough to call it back. Dr. Sarah Johnson arrived after night had fully settled over the foothills, when the wet trees around Ethan Miller's cabin had turned black against the sky, and the porch light glowed like a small, stubborn star refusing to surrender to the dark. Her white veterinary truck came slowly up the washed-out road, tires grinding through mud, headlights sweeping over broken branches and red runoff. When she stepped out, she looked exactly like her voice had promised. Compact, strong, and unsentimental. A 45-year-old woman with weather-brown skin, dark hair threaded with silver and tied back beneath a tan cap, sharp brown eyes that seemed able to cut through panic, and hands that moved with the calm authority of someone who had lost too much to waste time pretending the world was gentle. She carried a large green medical kit in one hand and a folded thermal blanket under the other arm. "No one moves fast unless I tell them to," she said, and somehow even the rain appeared to obey. Emily Carter gave her a brief report while Ethan knelt beside the first fawn, which lay wrapped in a towel near Grace's muzzle, breathing in tiny, uneven pulses. Sarah checked the newborn quickly, her stern face softening for half a heartbeat. "Small, premature, but alive," she said. "That's one miracle. Don't get greedy yet." Then she turned to Grace. The doe's eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow, her body trembling with a weakness that looked almost human in its misery. Sarah ran gloved hands along Grace's swollen belly, careful of the barbed wire still biting into the skin. Her expression hardened. "There's another one." Ethan looked up. "Another fawn?" "Yes, and this one is not moving much." The words struck the porch with the weight of a verdict. Emily shifted closer, face pale beneath the porch light, while Ethan felt the old cold open inside his ribs again. One life saved, another already slipping. It was the cruel humor of fate. The kind that arrived wearing muddy boots and asked if a man had learned anything since the last time he failed. Sarah snapped open her kit. "Emily, hold the light from that side. Ethan, I need you near her head, not her legs. Keep your voice low. If she panics, she can hurt herself and all of us." Ethan took the heavy flashlight, then moved where Sarah pointed. Grace's head rested near the threshold, half in the cabin warmth, half beneath the porch roof. Ethan crouched low, close enough to smell rain, blood, wet fur, and the sharp metallic stink of rusted wire. "Easy, Grace," he murmured, the name leaving his mouth before he fully understood he had given it to her. "You made it this far. Don't quit on me now." Sarah glanced up, but did not comment. She slid a small tube toward Grace's mouth and instructed Ethan how to hold it so the dough could take fluids without choking. He followed every word as if it were mission command. The same voice that had once guided men through night raids now softened into something almost prayerful. He spoke nonsense when he ran out of courage, telling Grace she was doing better than most recruits, telling the first fawn not to crawl into his boot because rent was expensive in Boulder, telling Emily that if this was wildlife work, he preferred being shot at because at least bullets did not require obstetrics. Emily gave a tired laugh despite herself. Sarah did not laugh, but one corner of her mouth moved as if humor had knocked and been allowed to stand politely outside. Then Grace convulsed. The second labor came harder and uglier than the first. Her body had almost nothing left to give, and each contraction moved through her like a wave breaking against a ruined shore. Sarah worked close to the ground, sleeves wet, gloves darkened, voice steady and exact. "Push, girl. Come on. One more." Ethan held the light, though his hand wanted to shake. He fixed his eyes on Grace's face instead of the blood, on the flicker of life in her black eye. He thought of Caleb Ross again, but this time the memory did not drag him under. It stood beside him like a ghost keeping watch. The second fawn slid into Sarah's hands just before midnight, smaller than the first, limp, its wet body frighteningly still. For a second, no one spoke. Even the rain seemed to pause on the roof. Sarah cleared the airway, rubbed hard, checked the tiny chest. Nothing. Emily's jaw tightened. Ethan felt his throat close. Grace lifted her head with impossible effort, saw the motionless fawn, and made a sound so low and broken, it seemed to rise from the old earth itself. "Bring it closer," Sarah said quietly. She placed the fawn near Grace's mouth. The doe's tongue moved once, weakly, then again. Slow, rough, deliberate. Each lick looked like it cost her a piece of her own life. The porch became silent, except for that sound. Tongue over wet fur, breath over newborn skin, rain beyond the tarp. It was not pretty. It was not clean. It was love in its oldest form, stubborn as roots under stone. Ethan watched Grace lick the fawn again and again, as if refusing to sign death's paperwork. Sarah continued rubbing the ribs with 2 fingers. "Come on," she whispered, and for the first time her voice lost its iron edge. "Come on, little one." The fawn's body twitched. Ethan leaned forward. "Was that?" "Quiet," Sarah said. Another twitch. Then the smallest rise of the chest, so faint it might have been a trick of light. Grace licked harder, her ears trembling. The tiny mouth opened, closed, then opened again. A thin breath slipped out, followed by a cracked, whispery sound. Not a cry yet, not victory. But life had answered. Ethan lowered his head and laughed once, silently, because anything louder might break the spell. By morning, the porch looked like a battlefield, after angels had done emergency medicine badly, but successfully. Grace lay exhausted, both fawns tucked near her belly, their fragile bodies rising and falling. Sarah stayed to monitor them while Emily followed the trail before the sun grew too hot. Ethan went with her up the muddy wash behind the cabin, past snapped grass, dragged plastic mesh, and bloody hoofprints fading into the red dirt. The little creek had swollen during the storm, tearing down through the hillside like a careless god. Half a mile up, they found the source. An old ranch fence collapsed into the gully, its rusted barbed wire twisted with shredded construction netting, plastic bags, and broken posts. The flood had ripped it loose and carried it straight across the deer path. Emily stood silently, fists on her hips, her face tight with anger. "Nobody meant to kill anything," she said. "They just left it here long enough for the mountain to finish the job." Ethan looked back toward the cabin, where Grace and her newborns fought for each breath. He understood then that harm did not always arrive wearing a villain's face. Sometimes it came from neglect, from things abandoned, from yesterday's laziness sharpened by rain. And sometimes, like barbed wire under summer water, forgetting could cut as deep as hate. By the third morning, the summer light returned to the foothills gently, pouring over Boulder's red dirt, pine needles, and wet stones like gold, being offered back to a tired world. Grace did not rise quickly, but she rose. That was enough to make the whole cabin feel different. For 3 days, Ethan Miller's porch had become something between a field hospital and a chapel, though it smelled far more like mud, antiseptic, deer hair, and old towels than any church would have proudly admitted. Dr. Sarah Johnson had checked Grace's wounds twice a day, cleaning the cuts around her neck and belly, removing the last barbed wire only after the bleeding slowed and the doe's strength returned. Emily Carter built a temporary pen from portable fencing and canvas shade beside the cabin, practical and quiet as always, moving with the calm rhythm of someone who knew hope had to be managed carefully, like fire in dry grass. Ethan helped without being asked. He carried water, changed towels, held the flashlight during late-night checks, and learned how to stand near Grace without making her fear him. That lesson, strangely, became a lesson about himself. He had spent years believing gentleness was something a man used only after the battle ended. Grace taught him otherwise. Sometimes gentleness was the battle. The two fawns changed faster than seemed reasonable. The first one, stronger from the beginning, pushed itself up on trembling legs during the second afternoon, folded, collapsed, then tried again with the offended dignity of a tiny prince betrayed by his own knees. Ethan watched from outside the pen and said, "That one's Hope." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Because she survived?" Ethan nodded, then pointed to the second fawn, who had just shoved its damp little nose into Sarah's medical bag and nearly tipped over backward. "And that disaster is Buddy." Sarah looked up from bandaging Grace's hind leg. "You named a wild animal, Buddy?" "He keeps headbutting everything like a new recruit trying to open doors with his face." For the first time since she arrived, Sarah laughed outright, a short, rough sound that startled a jay from the fence rail. Buddy, as if insulted by the comparison, wobbled toward Ethan's boot, bumped it with his nose, sneezed, and fell sideways into Hope. Both fawns lay stunned for one glorious second, then scrambled back up with the sacred foolishness of newborn life. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest, not disappear. Grief did not vanish like a villain defeated at sunrise. It was more stubborn than that, more like an old scar that predicted storms. But watching Hope and Buddy fall, rise, fall again, and rise again, he began to understand a truth so simple it almost embarrassed him. Living was not proof that nothing had broken. Living was the decision to stand on shaking legs anyway. On the third day, Sarah declared Grace strong enough to move. "Not healed," she warned, tightening the strap on her medical kit, "but stable. She needs safer ground, shade, water, and distance from roads, fences, and well-meaning people with cameras." Emily had already arranged the release site, a protected foothill area west of Boulder, where mule deer often moved through cottonwood shade and open grass without crossing the flooded wash. The transport was quiet and careful. They used a low livestock trailer lined with straw, keeping the fawns near Grace so she would not panic. Grace resisted at first, her dark eyes rolling toward the trees, but Ethan stood where she could see him and spoke in the same low voice he had used through the night of birth. "Easy, girl, one more ride, then you get your kingdom back." Emily glanced at him. "Kingdom?" "Look at her," Ethan said. "She's earned one." The drive to the release site took less than an hour, but to Ethan it felt like the slow procession of some ancient myth. The wounded queen, her two stumbling heirs, the healer, the ranger, and the soldier who had been invited, unwillingly and mercifully, back into the service of life. When they opened the trailer beneath a stand of cottonwoods, the air smelled of warm grass, creek water, and sunlit bark. Grace stepped out first, thin but steady, her summer coat brushed clean, except for the shaved patches and healing cuts that marked where the wire had tried to claim her. Hope followed, legs splayed, blinking at the bright world. Buddy came last, tripped over nothing, recovered with heroic confidence, and immediately bumped his nose against his mother's flank. "That one is going to worry every tree in Colorado," Sarah muttered. Emily smiled, but her eyes were damp. Grace lowered her head to both fawns, breathing them in, counting them in the only language that mattered. Then she began to walk toward the trees. Ethan stood apart from the others, his hands empty at his sides. He had carried weapons through deserts, oceans, and night operations where every shadow could kill. Yet nothing had ever made him feel as defenseless as watching those three fragile creatures move away. Halfway to the cottonwoods, Grace stopped. Slowly, she turned her head. Her black eyes found Ethan. There was no human thank you in them, no shining miracle splitting the sky, no angelic chorus loud enough to frighten the squirrels. There was only peace, quiet and complete, like a door inside him opening after years of being mistaken for a wall. Ethan bowed his head once. It was not dramatic. It was barely anything. But Emily saw it, and Sarah did too, and neither woman spoke. Some prayers were too private for witnesses, even when they happened in plain daylight. Grace turned back to her fawns. Hope bounced once, surprised by her own legs. Buddy followed with unnecessary enthusiasm and nearly collided with a sapling, proving Ethan's theory about new recruits. Then the three deer disappeared into the summer shade, leaving only bent grass behind. When Ethan returned to the cabin that evening, the porch was quiet. The blue tarp still hung from one corner. Mud stained the boards. A few pale deer hairs clung to an old towel near the steps. He stood there for a long time, listening. The silence was not the silence he had lived with before. That old silence had been a locked room. This one breathed. He cleaned the porch slowly, but not completely. He left one faint hoofprint near the threshold until the next rain could take it. Then he sat in the doorway as the first stars appeared over Boulder. And for the first time in years, Ethan did not feel abandoned by the life he had failed to save. He felt held by the lives that had passed through his hands and continued onward. Sometimes, he thought, God did not arrive as thunder or flame. Sometimes he came as a wounded deer at the door, two trembling fawns, and the terrible mercy of being asked to try again. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder, bright skies, or angels standing in the road. Sometimes a miracle comes quietly. It comes as a wounded deer at the door, as two tiny lives fighting for their first breath, as a broken man being asked to care one more time, even though his heart is tired. Ethan thought he had failed too deeply to be used for anything good again. But God often works through the very places we think are ruined. He takes grief, guilt, silence, and old pain, and he turns them into a doorway for mercy. In everyday life, we may not find a pregnant deer on our porch, but we do meet people who are wounded, afraid, lonely, or silently begging for help. Sometimes the miracle is not something we wait for. Sometimes the miracle is what happens when we choose kindness instead of walking away. So, if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us about a time when kindness changed your life. And please subscribe to the channel for more stories of courage, mercy, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you that even after the darkest storm, grace can still knock at the door.